Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and today it is the 17th of September, and today was relatively uneventful, but nonetheless I will cover whatever activity occurred today. So on the Andriivka bridgehead, we had news of Ukraine using helicopters to resupply their forces and replenish their losses, which does imply that the pontoon bridges are not working. So there have actually been engineers sent to the front lines to these rivers to help repair them very quickly before Russia can go on the offensive over here and quell the pocket. Something interesting that I noticed is that there were some obituaries of Ukrainian troops that died, and the town that was mentioned for their place of death was actually Burskinsky over here, which I've marked as under Russian control. But this does just go to show that many of the towns, they're not really firmly under any one side's control. The situation is very fluid. I repeat this a lot, but it is true. You can have sabotage groups entering these sparsely populated hamlets, and they might not be met with resistance if they're going in for like a few hours or minutes. But yes, you do see clashes around here, and not one side has full control of any of these towns, to be honest, along the front line, including the ones that I have marked here in black. So I'm just going to move this one to black as well. But besides that, on the front line, it's been relatively calm. We haven't really seen Ukraine able to break through in the areas that they've tried to break through, like Olhine, and then further to the south around Pravdina over here. But something that we did see is that there was actually gunfire reported in Kherson city itself, right next to the train station over here. So there was a video of the Russian troops engaging with the gunfire, and it was geolocated to this area specifically. The Russian story of events is that there was basically this grouping of people at this cafe called the Don Marco coffee shop, and they were saying that they were acting very suspiciously, so the Russian troops approached them and asked them to identify themselves. And at that moment, they basically opened fire, and there was a firefight that lasted about an hour. The Spetsnaz forces in the area were able to seal off the building, isolate the partisans, and neutralize them. We don't actually know what happened there, to be fair. The only footage was from a war reporter who was standing like 100 meters away with no helmet, interestingly. But anyway, it is interesting to see gunfire in Kherson city itself. It's not the first time that we've seen this. When the Kherson counteroffensive was announced like a week and a half ago, we also saw something very similar with gunfire within the city itself, and that could be from like SBU infiltrators or maybe partisans, like was mentioned a lot. And then you have like a lot of pro-Ukrainian sources that are saying, "Oh, it's Russian units infighting with each other," but there's no way to know for sure. But all in all, this was the least active area. Also, in Zaporizhia, Russia has moved in some reinforcements, which has sort of prevented Ukraine from a breakthrough over here. They did try to do these probing operations to break through, and they even were able to temporarily gain ground around Kamyanske, but they have not been able to break through here. And that's due to Russia actually pouring in resources to here, something that they failed to do in the Balaklia area, and they suffered greatly for that. So it seems like they've sort of learned their lesson in the Zaporizhia region, because we haven't really seen any breakthroughs over here, although there was very heavy fighting for the past week from Kamyanske to Orikhiv. No breakthroughs just yet, so it's possible that Ukraine will just cease with these offensive operations for a while in the area. Now, in Krasnohorivka, we actually have some very important news to talk about. The 100th Brigade of the DPR is said to have actually entered Krasnohorivka. This is based on Russian reports, so it might not be true, but they're not that far away. it's certainly plausible that they entered the first blocks, the first houses, because they're only like a few 100 feet away from the actual houses right now. So it's not that big of a deal, though, because it's not like Ukraine is going to leave this place without a fight. It is very heavily fortified because it was one of those towns that was very close to the front lines for 8 years, and I'm sure that they have tons of defensive positions set up around here. Most of the civilians are already gone, probably, so the Ukrainians are hiding in every single residential building, which is now cleared, which also does open up Russia the opportunity to use thermobaric weapons like they did at Pesky. So do look out for that. This is going to be a very heavy fight, and there will be a lot of losses on both sides. It's going to be very similar to Pesky, as I said before, but on a larger scale because Krasnohorivka is larger in terms of size, and it is also just as fortified. So the battles here will be very interesting to look at. That's it for this part of the front line. Just side note, Donetsk was actually pretty heavily shelled today, which is pretty notable, mainly with 122 and 155 millimeter artillery shells. But anyway, let's move on to the Bakhmut front, where we actually have one change, and I have to correct myself a little. So today, Ryabal reported that the Donbaskaya Substation was taken by Wagner troops. I had previously said that they did this, but I guess I was wrong, and I think I see why I got it wrong, because in the video it shows Ukrainian troops that were in the substation that were then starting to drive, getting ambushed by the Wagner troops, and then obviously some of them were killed, others were injured, but that does not definitively prove that the substation was under Wagner control. It just means that the Ukrainians suffered some losses over there. So I made a mistake when saying that it had fallen to Wagner. Now it seems as if it actually has, and that would, of course, open the gateways to Vesela Dolina itself, which is really just a minor town with one big house and a few smaller ones around it. And then also you have some agricultural fields and nothing else before you reach Ivanhrad, Opitny, and all the Bakhmut suburbs. So maybe we'll see some movement around here. It seems as if Ukraine has actually started setting up defenses on the western side of this road over here. So it's going to be very difficult for Russia to actually break through on this road area. So I would think that they're probably going to go for attacking from a different direction if they want to actually reach Kordyumivka, probably from Mayorsk itself, and not by crossing the road because of how the elevation dynamics are in this area, and just given the fact that Ukraine has set up a new defensive line. But anyway, in Bakhmut, we have again talks from Russian sources that the Wagner troops have a foothold on Patrice Lumumba Street. Again, we talked about this in August, but even now, it seems as if they've retained their position after constant fighting around here. And what was said is that a Dacha cooperative was taken by the Wagner troops. I think that's like a farming house or some shack that's related to farming. So it might be this place over here. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's move on to the Seversk front, where it seems the situation has stabilized due to LPR sending some reinforcements. LPR troops aren't the best, but it seems as if the 6th Cossack Army has done a pretty good job at stabilizing the front line over here, and specifically the 208th Cossack Regiment has been moved into the Bilohorivka area and prevented a breakthrough over here. So now they're just holding the line. Over here in the Liman front, Shuchuruve, I already had it marked as under Ukrainian control, but now we actually have evidence because we have a video of the 66th Mechanized Brigade in the town. And I don't think this is the real geolocation. I'm just assuming it's in the church because in the video there was a bell and some bricks, but I'm not entirely sure if this is the correct location. I might be wrong about that. But besides that, there hasn't been any other changes. Yampiel still under Russian control, but we might see the Robicheve fall very soon. If not from the south, then perhaps from the western area, because now Studenok and Sosnove have been confirmed under Ukrainian control. Russia withdrew from here before they can get encircled. And this also means I have to change the polygon over here, which will take a while because you can see how many dots I have over here. So I'll have to work on that tomorrow. But just know that for the most part, Russia has vacated these forested areas, and now just you have Ukraine clearing them as they cross the river and gain a foothold in some of these towns around here. And they're very close to reaching Alexandrivka, which would be a loss for Russia, but if they're able to leave before getting encircled, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It does mean that they have to set up a new front line somewhere because they will be exposed at Rubitsy and Yatskivka. As far north as Pisky, Radkivsky, they might actually lose those towns too if they're not able to set up some proper defenses. And that would just open up the floodgates, and you could see even Borova fall, which was like one of those towns that was fought over in the early stages of the Battle of Donbass in April. So again, it would be a pretty big loss, and it would undermine Russia's new defensive positions east of the Oskil River. So we're going to have to see where they draw the line and where they stop withdrawing, because this could lead to Liman being attacked from both sides, as I talked about yesterday. But anyway, let's move on to the last front over here, the Kharkov front, where I just wanted to mention a interesting article by the Washington, actually it was the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, and they actually talked about how the Russians acquired the Shahed 136 drones. So the Russian equivalent of that is the Geranium 2 drone. Basically, the article goes over how it's been utilized by the Russian military, first in testing, where they destroyed an M777 American howitzer. It's mainly been used around the Nikopol, Maharnets, but now we're also starting to see the drone being used on the Kharkiv front specifically, because the Wall Street Journal, they interviewed some officials from the 92nd Mechanized Brigade, which, if you remember, was one of the main units that pushed into Kupiansk and actually helped take it over. So they're mentioning the fact that they've actually lost several pieces of artillery and infantry fighting vehicles due to these drones. So clearly they're being utilized on the Kharkiv front, sort of as a way to compensate for the lack of manpower, and also to sort of offset the advantages that Ukraine has due to the HIMARS and their MLRS systems. Because the Shahed drones are actually pretty good, they're relatively small and they also fly at low altitudes, so it's hard for Ukraine's air defense system to spot them. Usually they go for targets that are closer to the front line, not necessarily deeper in the front, deeper in Ukrainian territory. You haven't seen really like these drones destroying command posts or depots that are like deeper in, but they do destroy military equipment that's stationed along the front line, and it seems as if they've been relatively successful at that. And usually what happens is you have these drones, they operate in groups, and then they take out different targets. Maybe they'll take out an artillery complex and then also a radar system simultaneously. So that's really the strategy that Russia has been going for with using these drones, and they're going to start using more and more of them now, specifically on this front, I'd say, because it is a way to sort of compensate for manpower losses. Now, in the area just south of the Donetsk bridgehead, we have this town called Mykolaievka, and you have the Slavyanska thermal power plant over here located in the marker. So it was actually heavily damaged by Russian shelling today, and this is another thermal power plant, another Ukrainian energy hub that has been destroyed in the course of about a week. So this one was not done by any like airstrikes, it's by shelling, but it is pretty interesting to look at and have the photos linked. Last thing to say is that the situation in Kupiansk is ambiguous. I did change it back to Russia controlling the eastern portion now because it's being reported by locals that there weren't like Ukrainian flags raised or anything. The video that was released, which was pretty deep into the eastern part of the city, about a mile away from the river, but nonetheless, it was just a small squad of troops that were able to break through because it wasn't that heavily manned, this area. So they were able to break through and carry out whatever recon or sabotage operations they had planned, and now they just crossed back over. So the situation is ambiguous. I'm not exactly sure how much of it Russia controls, how much of it Ukraine controls. It seems as if Ukraine has the capabilities to cross over the river since they have released that video, but we haven't really seen any additional videos showing them roaming through the streets of some of these key areas in the eastern part of the city, so I'm just keeping it red for now. That might change later on, though. And that's really it for today. Today was much less eventful. Thank you all for watching, though, and I'll see you later.